Before we begin the story, let us know where you're watching from by leaving a comment below. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the story, everyone. The room smelled of paper and steel, cold, pristine, and final. Ethan stood by the panoramic window of his corner office, hands clasped behind his back, watching the city fade into the horizon. The sunset bathed the glass in gold, but nothing softened the harshness in his expression. The pen rested on the contract like a silent challenge. Across from him, Olivia sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her skin was pale, not from lack of light, but from the years of tension woven into it. She didn't ask questions. She had read every line. She had stared at that clause over and over. No physical contact, no shared bedroom, no obligations beyond public appearances. A marriage made for the headlines, a contract born of necessity, a lifeline disguised as convenience. Ethan finally turned, his voice low and controlled. "If you're having second thoughts, now is the time to walk away." "I'm not," she said quietly. Her voice barely reached him across the room, but it didn't waver. As long as the rules are respected, he gave a small nod and signed the final page with precision. His movements were clinical, detached. This wasn't love. It wasn't even friendship. It was an exchange. She would provide the illusion of a stable family life to protect his inheritance, and in return, he would provide financial support and never touch her. Olivia had learned the hard way what a touch could destroy. Her last relationship had started with flowers and ended with bruises so well hidden they seemed like secrets. Since then, she had built walls so high no one dared to climb them. Until Ethan, who didn't want love, only silence, only distance. A week later, they were married in a private courthouse ceremony, attended by 2 silent witnesses. No vows, no rings, just ink on paper. They moved into his estate on the edge of New York, a glass and stone mansion with rooms too vast for their silence. She took the west wing, he stayed in the east. At night, the only sound was the wind against the glass. Olivia decorated her space slowly, adding soft fabrics and warm colors to a house that felt more like a boardroom. A few plants, an easel she hadn't touched in years. In the beginning, she couldn't sleep. The bed was too big, too quiet. She lay there listening to every sound, waiting for the past to catch up with her. Ethan rarely saw her during the day. He worked 12-hour shifts at Sterling Holdings, navigating boardroom battles and press scandals. When they did share space, it was over silent dinners at a long mahogany table, where silverware clinked like footsteps in a cathedral. Sometimes their eyes met briefly. He never asked questions. She never offered answers. But every time she looked up, she caught something in his gaze. A flicker of something that wasn't cruelty or desire, just awareness. The kind that said, "I see you, even if I don't know what you've survived." Weeks passed like clouds, slow, shapeless, untouchable. Then came the day she dropped her coffee mug. It shattered across the marble floor, and without thinking, Ethan appeared beside her. He knelt to help her clean it. His fingers brushed hers. The contact was accidental, but her whole body froze. She pulled away so quickly that she scraped her hand on the glass. Ethan rose to his feet and didn't reach for her again. But something had shifted, cracked open between them. Not desire, not even closeness, just humanity. That night, he left a small first aid kit outside her door. No note, just care in its purest, most wordless form. Olivia didn't know what to make of him. He was powerful, but never forceful. Cold, but never cruel. She had expected distance, but not this kind of silence, one that held space instead of occupying it. Ethan, on the other hand, didn't know why she lingered in his thoughts. He had chosen her because of her detachment. She wouldn't ask for affection, wouldn't demand his time. She had been the safest option in a world full of gold diggers and paparazzi. But every time he heard her footsteps down the hall, something inside him stilled. His world was full of sharp things, lawyers, shareholders, hostile takeovers. But Olivia moved like mist, soft, evasive, unforgettable. One evening, as a storm rolled in over the hills, she stood outside on the veranda, letting the wind tangle her hair. Ethan saw her through the glass, barefoot on the wet stone, eyes closed as if listening to something deeper than the thunder. She didn't notice him watching, and he didn't look away. Inside that mansion built for business deals, something unspoken began to take root. Not love, not yet, but something gentler, a presence, a rhythm, the space between two strangers narrowing. Then came the night that would change everything. It was past midnight. Rain tapped at the windows like a restless thought. Ethan had just returned from a late meeting when he heard it. A scream, rough, piercing, terrified. He froze. It came again, muffled, but unmistakable from the west wing. Without thinking, he moved. Her bedroom door was ajar. Moonlight spilled across the floor, catching the twist of her body beneath the blankets. She thrashed, breath catching in short, panicked gasps. Sweat soaked her forehead. Her lips parted in a silent cry. "Stop! Nathan, please stop!" Ethan stepped closer, something primal tightening in his chest. He knelt beside her and gently touched her shoulder. "Olivia, you're dreaming." She didn't wake. Her hands curled into fists. She whimpered. "Hey," his voice cracked. "It's okay. You're safe." He didn't think, he just reacted. Sliding beside her on top of the blankets, careful not to break the rules, he wrapped an arm around her trembling frame. She stiffened but didn't pull away. Her breathing slowed. Her body, rigid moments before, melted into his. Within seconds, silence, then sleep. Ethan stayed all night, his arm beneath her head, her fingers curled near his chest. He didn't sleep. He listened to the rhythm of her breathing, to the rain, to something inside him he hadn't heard in years. By morning, Olivia stirred. Her eyes fluttered open. When she saw him there, awake, still holding her, she didn't scream. She didn't run. Her voice was a whisper, but not from fear. "You stayed." Ethan didn't move. "You were scared." She blinked once, then again. "I don't remember falling asleep." "I know." She looked down at his arm. He started to pull away to retreat back into the safety of their distance, but her fingers gripped his sleeve just for a second. That was all it took. Something in the contract had been broken, and something in them had just begun. The mansion was quiet, always too quiet. Mornings began with silence so thick it could almost be touched. The only sound was the distant hum of the espresso machine that Ethan insisted on using himself. Despite the housekeeper's availability, Olivia often woke before sunrise, curled at the far edge of her bed, tangled in a thin blanket that never seemed warm enough. Their new life had no clear shape, no real rhythm. They passed each other like strangers trapped in a shared dream. In theory, they were husband and wife. On paper, they were one, but in practice, they were shadows in separate hallways. Ethan left early each morning, his dark suits perfectly pressed, his jaw tight with purpose. Olivia watched him from the window once, just once, before deciding she didn't want to feel that kind of ache again. There was something about the way he moved, precise, untouchable, like a man who had buried tenderness long ago. She didn't know his favorite food or his birthday, and he never asked what her paintings once looked like. Yet, strangely, she never felt watched. In this glass mansion that echoed like a cathedral, he never invaded her space, never knocked on her door, never stared too long. But sometimes she caught his eyes lingering on her hands during dinner, the way her fingers curled nervously around the silverware, the way she wiped a napkin across her mouth as if apologizing for existing. He noticed, even when he pretended not to, they had agreed on separate wings of the house, but there were shared spaces, the dining room, the garden, the occasional board event they had to attend together, arm in arm for the cameras, then separate cars back home. Olivia hated it, hated the way people looked at her, as if trying to decode what she was doing next to a man like him. "Smile," Ethan had whispered once under his breath as flashes went off in their faces, just for show. And she had, not for the cameras, but for him, for the way his hand gently steadied her waist, even though they had sworn to keep their distance. Back at the house, they returned to silence. One night, as rain pressed against the windows, she heard music coming faintly from the east wing. Not classical, jazz, raw, slow, old. Ethan was somewhere behind the walls, alone, letting a trumpet fill the space with melancholy. Olivia sat on the floor of her art room, surrounded by unopened boxes of brushes and blank canvases. Her fingers itched, but she couldn't touch them. The fear still lived in her chest, heavy and stubborn. What if the moment she painted again, she remembered everything? But something about that music, seeping through the mansion like a memory, made her pause. The next morning, Ethan was already gone. She found a small package near the coffee maker. Chamomile tea. She hadn't asked for it, hadn't mentioned the insomnia, but somehow he knew. She brewed a cup and sat at the kitchen counter, staring at the steam. When he returned that evening, she met him at the table. Their usual silence stretched between them like fog until her voice cracked through it. "Thank you," she said softly, not looking up. Ethan glanced at her, surprised. "For what?" "The tea." He nodded once, as if unsure how to respond. You weren't sleeping." She didn't ask how he knew, she just nodded too. And that was all. But the silence felt different that night. Not heavy, not cold, just quiet. And then came the moment that would change everything again. It was small, barely a moment at all. Olivia was reaching for a glass on the top shelf in the kitchen. She stretched on her toes, fingers brushing the rim, but it slipped. She gasped, eyes wide as it began to fall. Ethan caught it. His hand moved fast, precise, snatching the glass mid-air before it shattered. Olivia froze. Their faces were suddenly too close, their breathing shallow. Her chest brushed his arm. She stepped back instantly, cheeks burning. I didn't mean to." "It's okay," he said, voice low, unreadable. He set the glass down gently. "No harm done." She nodded, retreating like a frightened deer. But she didn't leave the room. Instead, she leaned against the counter, heart racing, feeling the echo of that moment thrum in her spine. He stood there for a second longer, watching her, and then he left. That night, she couldn't sleep, not because of fear, but because of the feeling of his hand brushing hers, because something warm had stirred inside her, unfamiliar, but not unwelcome. Ethan felt it too. Back in his wing, he loosened his tie, staring at the reflection in the mirror. What was happening? This wasn't supposed to become real. The contract had been clear. He had chosen Olivia precisely because of her boundaries. Her walls made her safe, predictable. But now he was starting to wish he could cross the line. Over the next days, their dinners grew slightly longer. She began arriving at the table 5 minutes earlier. He stayed 5 minutes later. They still didn't talk much. But when they did, the silences between their sentences weren't as sharp. "Do you like what you do?" she asked one evening. He looked up. Fork paused in midair. "Like it at the company?" He thought for a moment. "I don't know. I've been doing it for so long. I'm not sure I've ever asked myself that." She nodded slowly. "I used to paint." He glanced at her hands, then at the specks of dry color beneath her nails. His voice was quiet. "You still do." Her eyes widened just a little. That night, she opened a box, took out a brush, just touched it, and for the first time in years, she didn't flinch. Ethan noticed the soft glow under her door as he passed by later that evening. It stayed on until dawn. He said nothing, but inside him something softened. One morning, as she passed him on the stairs, she said, "Your music, the jazz, I heard it. It was nice." He blinked. "You were listening. I liked it." And then she was gone, leaving behind the scent of lavender and something unspoken. That night, he played the same track again, just a little louder. In their shared world of glass and stone, nothing dramatic had changed, but everything felt different. There were new patterns now, unwritten rules. Her mug appeared beside his on the counter. His voice softened when saying her name. They weren't lovers. They weren't friends. But they were no longer strangers. The contract was intact, but the distance, it was beginning to fracture. And as Olivia stood by the window one night, watching lightning dance across the hills, she whispered something into the glass. "I don't think I hate being here anymore." What she didn't know was that Ethan, down the hall, was staring at the same storm, wondering when the moment would come when he'd no longer be able to follow the rules he himself had written. It was nearly 3 a.m. When the scream shattered the silence, Ethan shot upright in his bed, heart pounding. The remnants of a restless sleep fading instantly. The sound had come from the west wing. One scream, sharp, broken, then a series of muffled whimpers. It wasn't the kind of noise one imagined. It was real too, and it was Olivia. He hesitated for only a second. The rules, the contract, the distance, but her voice, raw, pleading, echoed in his mind like a warning shot. He was already moving before the thought could finish. Down the dim hallway, barefoot on cold marble. The storm outside matched the turmoil inside him. He didn't knock. He pushed open her bedroom door. The air smelled faintly of lavender and fear. Moonlight spilled across the bed where Olivia twisted violently under the sheets. Her hands were clenched, arms flailing as if trying to fight something invisible, her face contorted with pain. "No, no. Stop it, Nathan. Get away from me." Ethan's chest tightened. He didn't know the full story yet, but he knew that name, the one she never spoke aloud unless something inside her broke. He stepped toward her, voice soft but firm. "Olivia, it's just a dream. You're safe." But she didn't wake. Her cries sharpened. Without thinking, he reached for her, breaking every line of the contract, and placed his hand gently on her shoulder. "Olivia." She recoiled. Even in sleep, tears soaked her temple. Her whole body trembled as she cried out again. He knelt beside the bed, unsure, then slowly did something he never imagined doing in this house. He climbed onto the bed above the covers, fully clothed, careful not to frighten her more. Then he lay beside her, not as a husband, not as a stranger, but as something closer to a protector, a shield. He wrapped one arm around her without pressing, letting her feel the warmth of another human being, not one that demanded, but one that stayed. And slowly, her body began to calm, her fists unclenched, her breath steadied, the cries quieted. She shifted just slightly and curled into the curve of his chest, her hand resting near his heart. He didn't move. For the first time in his adult life, Ethan didn't think about company shares, board meetings, or legacy. He thought only of the woman in his arms and the quiet sobs that had faded into peace. Time passed like a whisper. He stayed the entire night, not because of obligation, not because of guilt, but because something in him, something buried for years, refused to leave her alone. The next morning, Olivia stirred as sunlight warmed the sheets. Her lashes fluttered before her eyes opened, hazy with confusion. She was still wrapped in warmth. A steady heartbeat echoed beneath her ear. She stiffened. Ethan didn't move. He was awake, had been for hours, watching her breathe, holding his breath, unsure of what she would do when she realized. She pushed herself up slowly, careful not to startle either of them. Her eyes met his, wide, unreadable. "You were here," she said, barely above a whisper. He nodded. "You were having a nightmare." She glanced away, ashamed. "I didn't mean to." "You don't need to explain," he said softly. "You don't have to apologize." Silence hung between them, and then she asked the question he hadn't prepared for. "Why did you stay?" He didn't answer right away, not with words. Instead, he looked at her like a man looking at sunlight through broken glass. Something beautiful, fragile, shattered in places, but still glowing. "Because you didn't deserve to be alone with that," he finally said. She blinked hard, as if holding back tears. "You broke the contract." "I did," he said, "and I'd do it again." Her lips parted, but she said nothing, just nodded once. From that moment forward, the contract no longer felt like law. It felt like history. Later that night, Olivia knocked softly on his door. Ethan opened it, already dressed in sweatpants and a t-shirt, no longer the suited CEO, but a man suspended between roles. Her voice trembled. "Would you sleep in my room again tonight?" He didn't hesitate. "Of course, no touching," she clarified, as if afraid of herself, of him, of what safety might feel like too soon. "I know," he replied, "just presence." And that's what he gave her. Night after night, he would lie on top of the covers, arms folded behind his head, watching the shadows on the ceiling. Olivia would rest with her, back turned at first. Later, she began sleeping on her side, facing him. The distance between them shrank with time, but he never crossed the line again, not unless she did. Some nights they talked in low voices, sharing fragments of their childhoods. Other nights they said nothing at all. The silence became sacred, and somehow, in that unspoken agreement, a connection deeper than any kiss began to grow. Olivia started painting again. Not full canvases, just colors, shapes, movements, a brush dipped in warm tones that didn't yet have names. Ethan noticed the faint streaks of crimson and indigo on her forearm one morning and said nothing, but his chest felt tight with something like awe. She was healing, and it began with that night, the night he broke the contract out of compassion, not to claim her, but to show her that not all closeness is control. He never mentioned Nathan again, but he saw it in her eyes, the way the shadows still hovered around certain corners of her mind, and he made himself a quiet vow to be a space where she never had to flinch again. One night, as they lay in the dark, Olivia spoke into the stillness. "I don't remember the last time I slept without waking up in fear." Ethan turned his head toward her. "You did tonight." She looked at him, eyes gleaming in the dark. "Because you were there." He swallowed hard. "I always will be." The room was quiet again, but this time the silence held something tender. A promise without pressure, a closeness without cost. The contract, once a wall, had become irrelevant, and as Ethan drifted to sleep beside her, he realized that the rules he had written no longer protected him. They had become the very thing he wished he could escape. Because what he felt now, stirring softly, dangerously, wasn't strategy. It was longing, and he had no idea what to do with it. The morning after Ethan held her through her nightmare, the mansion didn't feel the same. It wasn't louder. The walls still whispered, the floors still echoed, but something had changed. It was in the way Olivia lingered longer at the kitchen counter, watching the coffee drip instead of hurrying back to her wing. It was in the way Ethan poured her tea before she asked, sliding it across the marble island with a quiet glance, his sleeve brushing the edge of her hand. For weeks they had lived like statues in parallel galleries, still separate, untouched. Now, without words, their days began to align. Olivia no longer flinched when his footsteps sounded in the hallway. Ethan, in turn, stopped walking so deliberately, as if trying not to disturb her. The house, once filled with avoidance, started breathing with a new rhythm. Every night he came to her room. He knocked first, always, and every time she said the same word, yes. At first, it was just about the nightmares, but soon it became something else. Not romance, not désir, not yet. Something quieter. Presence. He never undressed. He lay on top of the covers, arms folded across his chest or behind his head, like a sentinel watching over her sleep. Sometimes he drifted off, sometimes he didn't, but he was always there when she woke. And Olivia, she stopped locking her door. She began to sleep through the night, deeply, peacefully. And each morning her eyes opened just a little softer. One evening, she returned to her bedroom and found a book on her nightstand, a worn copy of The Little Prince, her favorite since childhood. She picked it up slowly, her heart catching in her throat. Inside the cover was a sticky note written in neat, masculine handwriting. You mentioned it once, thought it might help you dream of other planets tonight. E. She pressed the note to her chest. It wasn't grand, it wasn't loud, but it was the first time anyone had remembered something so small about her and offered it without expecting anything in return. Later that week, Ethan came home later than usual. Olivia had waited in the kitchen longer than she meant to, sipping tea, fidgeting with the hem of her sweater. When she finally heard the car in the driveway, she stood quickly, startled by how much her body recognized his return. He walked in, looking exhausted, his tie undone, hair slightly out of place. I didn't mean to keep you waiting, he said, noticing her by the counter. She shrugged, trying to look casual. I wasn't waiting, just couldn't sleep. A pause. Then he asked, do you want me to come up? She looked down at her mug, then back at him. Yes. And when they climbed the stairs together, it felt different, not like a ritual, but like a choice made in quiet unison. That night, before turning off the lamp, Olivia said something she hadn't said since the wedding. Good night, Ethan. He looked over, surprised, then nodded once. Good night, Olivia. The next morning, she laughed for the first time. It was at something small. Ethan had accidentally spilled orange juice on a business report while checking his phone in the kitchen. His expression was so genuinely annoyed, so human, that Olivia burst into quiet, sudden laughter. He turned to her, startled, then smiled. A real smile. Don't laugh, he said, trying not to smile wider. This was a 10-page board summary. She giggled again, eyes sparkling. Looks like it's now a breakfast summary. And just like that, the tension broke. That day she painted, not just lines, color, form, a sketch of a figure seated in a window. Looking out, the face was unfinished. But the shoulders, they looked familiar, solid, watchful, like someone who had stayed through the storm. Ethan passed by the studio later and stopped in the doorway. She didn't see him, not at first. She was focused, a smudge of blue on her cheek, a strand of hair stuck to her lips. He watched her for a long moment, not saying a word, because for the first time she looked like she belonged in her skin again. That evening, Olivia prepared dinner. It wasn't fancy. Pasta, wine, a quiet table near the garden doors. When Ethan came in and saw the candles lit, the soft music playing, he paused. You didn't have to do this, he said gently. I know, she replied. I wanted to. They ate slowly. The conversation soft but steady. She asked about his sister. He asked about her favorite brushes. They shared childhood stories. Nothing too heavy, but enough to color in the outlines of who they were before the world hardened them. Afterward, she walked him to the stairs. He looked down at her, hands in his pockets, and before either of them could name the feeling, Olivia said it again. Will you stay? That night, he lay closer, not touching, not pushing, but nearer than usual. And when she reached for his hand under the blankets, tentative, featherlight, he didn't move, didn't speak. He just let her fingers rest against his palm, curled softly like a secret. They stayed like that until dawn. In the morning, she found a canvas on her easel with a single brushstroke of gold, She didn't remember painting it, but something about that color felt like him. The brushes were old, but her hands remembered them. They fit like a memory, unfamiliar at first, then suddenly natural. Olivia stood in front of the easel, barefoot, her hair twisted in a loose bun, paint already streaking her knuckles. The morning light filtered through the wide glass windows, wrapping the studio in a golden hush. She hadn't painted in years, not since the silence of her last relationship had suffocated her creativity. Nathan hadn't just taken her confidence, he had stolen her colors. He told her her art was childish, pointless, that no one would ever understand what she was trying to express. Over time, she had believed him, but Ethan had never said a word about her painting, never praised, never pressured. He just made space. And somehow that silence, the right kind of silence, was louder than any compliment. Now she dipped her brush into deep navy blue and pulled it across the canvas. A single stroke, tentative, uneven. She stepped back, stared, then tried again. This time crimson, bold, bruised, and alive. She didn't try to explain what she was creating. She didn't even know herself. All she knew was that something inside her had begun to move again, something soft, wild, and desperately hers. That afternoon, Ethan stopped outside the door of her studio. It was slightly ajar. He hadn't intended to intrude, but the sight through the crack made him pause. Olivia was standing in the middle of the room, brush in one hand, palette in the other. Her shirt was splattered with color, her jeans stained near the knees. A soft hum left her lips, tuneless, but full of breath. There was a smear of ochre across her cheek. She looked radiant and completely unaware of him. He could have stood there forever, but he stepped back silently instead, giving her the privacy she didn't know she needed. Later, when she joined him in the kitchen, cheeks flushed from hours in the studio, she found a small note beside her teacup. "Welcome back," just 2 words. But she knew what they meant, and her chest tightened with something like gratitude. Over the next days, her studio transformed. Blank canvases vanished, one by one. The room filled with color, with life. The scent of linseed oil and acrylic filled the halls, replacing the cold sterility that once marked her wing. Ethan never asked to see her work, but he noticed how her posture changed, how she stood straighter, smiled longer, how her eyes began to reflect light instead of absorbing it. And Olivia noticed things about him, too. He came home earlier now, turned his phone face down during dinner. Once she caught him leaning against the doorframe of the garden, staring out into the flowers with a softness she hadn't seen before. He was still a man of control, still precise, restrained, but now she caught glimpses of the boy he must have been once, before ambition carved sharp edges into him. One night she wandered into the living room and found him at the piano. She hadn't known he played. The piece was simple, slow, melancholic. She stood quietly in the shadows, just watching his fingers dance across the keys, like they were telling a story only he could hear. When he finished, he looked up and saw her. Their eyes met, and in that gaze, something passed between them that neither dared name. She approached slowly and sat on the floor beside the piano, resting her cheek against her knees. "Do you miss it?" she asked. He turned toward her. "Miss what?" "Playing for yourself." Before everything became about responsibility, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I don't know if I remember what that feels like." She didn't speak, just stayed there beside him, while the silence wrapped around them again. But not like before. Now it was a bridge. Later that week, Olivia brought one of her smaller paintings to the dining room. It wasn't finished, but it was raw, honest. A figure standing at the edge of a cliff, surrounded by waves of color, fear, memory, and motion. She placed it on the table before dinner. Ethan stopped when he saw it. He didn't speak right away, just looked, really looked. Then he said, "She looks like she's waiting for something." Olivia blinked. "She is." "What?" She hesitated, then whispered, "A reason to stay." Ethan met her eyes across the table. "You don't need a reason," he said quietly. "You are one." She looked down, heart racing. Something had shifted again. Later that night, when he joined her in her room, he brought his copy of The Little Prince. They read a few pages in silence, side by side, under the soft glow of her lamp. At one point he paused and asked, "Do you remember why you love this story so much?" She nodded. "Because it reminds me that the most important things are invisible." He smiled faintly. "Like trust or healing?" she added. They didn't hold hands that night, but their hearts were no longer strangers. One morning, She painted something new. A man and a woman standing apart, but tethered by golden threads that shimmered across a stormy sky. It wasn't about romance. It was about presence, about the safety of being seen and not touched, held without being captured. Olivia looked at the finished canvas, her fingers stained with gold. She stepped back and realized she had painted him, not in likeness, but in essence, in the way the figure stood, watchful, protective, never looming, and in the way the light bent toward him. That evening she invited Ethan to the studio. He walked in slowly, unsure. It was the first time she had allowed him inside the space she had kept as a sanctuary. She gestured to the painting. "That's you." He looked at it, eyes softening, and for the first time, Ethan, the man who never let anyone in, felt seen, not as a CEO, not as a husband on paper, but as a human being. He turned to her. "It's beautiful." Olivia nodded. "So are the things we survive." They stood in silence, surrounded by color, memory, and something else blooming quietly in the space between them. Not love, not yet, but something strong enough to hold it when it came. The invitation arrived in a white envelope, thick with elegance and pressure. Olivia found it on the kitchen counter beside her teacup, her name written in elegant gold ink. Inside, a formal request from Margaret Sterling, Ethan's mother, for the attendance of Mr. and Mrs. Sterling at the Sterling Foundation annual gala. Olivia's stomach turned. The event was one of the most prestigious on the East Coast, an ocean of gowns, cameras, whispers, and calculated smiles. The idea of walking into that space beside Ethan, exposed to judgment, family politics, and him, made her knees feel weak. That night, she sat curled on the sofa in her room, the invitation untouched on the side table. Ethan knocked once before stepping in. He didn't speak right away. "I won't make you go," he said finally. "But my mother's expecting it. It's important to her, to the company." Olivia nodded slowly. "So, it's not about you." He paused. "It's about both of us. But mostly it's about showing the world we're solid." She looked up at him. "And are we?" A silence stretched. Then quietly, "We're getting there." She sighed. "People will talk, judge, stare. I'll be right beside you," he said. Steady. The entire time, that promise, simple and firm, anchored her. Still, the next few days were a blur of tension. A stylist came to the mansion at Ethan's request. Olivia had nothing suitable for such a formal event, and though she protested, she eventually allowed herself to be measured, fitted, transformed. When she stepped into the soft champagne gown the night of the gala, something in her reflection startled her. She looked powerful, not because of the dress or the makeup, but because of the way she held herself, like a woman learning not to shrink. Ethan stood at the base of the stairs, dressed in a black tuxedo, every detail precise, his cufflinks, his cologne, his silence. When he looked up and saw her, he froze. His gaze swept over her, not with hunger, but with awe. "You look." He cleared his throat. "You're radiant." She smiled faintly, eyes flickering with nerves. "Don't let go of my hand tonight." "I won't," he said, "no matter what." The gala was held at the Sterling Estate downtown, an architectural masterpiece filled with chandeliers, whispered alliances, and polished secrets. Flashbulbs exploded as they stepped from the car. "Ethan, over here. Is this your wife? First public appearance. Mrs. Sterling, give us a smile." Olivia's chest tightened, but Ethan's grip on her hand never faltered. He led her past the cameras into the marble foyer, lit like a dream and a battlefield. Margaret Sterling descended the stairs like a queen, tall, silver-haired, and intimidatingly composed. She greeted Ethan with air kisses, then turned to Olivia with a calculated smile. "You clean up beautifully, dear," she said. Olivia smiled politely. "Thank you for the invitation." Margaret tilted her head. "Let's hope you hold your own tonight. These people, they're observant." "She's not here to perform," Ethan cut in, his tone calm but edged. "She's here as my wife." Margaret's smile didn't flinch. "Of course, darling. I simply mean, appearances matter." Olivia stood straighter. She wasn't the same girl who hid in corners anymore. She walked into the ballroom with Ethan at her side, every step loud in her own ears. The room was filled with glittering dresses, tailored suits, and eyes. So many eyes. Whispers followed her like smoke. "Is that her? I heard she was an artist or something?" Not exactly what I pictured for Ethan. She held Ethan's hand tighter. Then, across the room, she spotted Lucas, Ethan's cousin. He was charming, all smiles and practiced grace. But his eyes were knives wrapped in velvet. He approached them with a flute of champagne in hand. "Well, if it isn't the newlyweds," he said smoothly. "Olivia, isn't it? We've heard so little about you." She met his gaze without blinking. "I imagine that was intentional." Ethan's hand subtly moved to the small of her back. Support, not possession. Lucas's smile thinned. "Feisty. I like that. I'm sure the board does too." Ethan's expression didn't change. "Careful, Lucas. You're out of practice when it comes to subtlety." Before the tension could rise, Margaret reappeared with a new wave of guests to greet. Olivia and Ethan moved toward the garden for air. The night had grown cool, the string quartet's music drifting through the open doors. "That wasn't so bad," Olivia said, exhaling. "I told you I'd stay close," Ethan replied, but then everything froze. Across the patio, near the fountains, a familiar figure stood watching her. Nathan. Her breath caught. Her body went cold. It couldn't be. He was supposed to be gone. Out of state. Out of her life. But there he was. Smiling, Ethan felt her hand go rigid in his. "What is it?" She didn't answer. He turned to follow her gaze, and his jaw clenched. "Who is that?" she whispered. "Nathan." And just like that, her skin broke into goosebumps. Her knees weakened. Ethan stepped in front of her protectively. "Stay here." "No, please don't leave me alone." She grabbed his arm. He looked down at her, saw the terror in her eyes, and for the first time, Ethan, CEO, strategist, heir, forgot the contract, forgot the politics, forgot the audience. He pulled Olivia into his arms right there on the gala steps. Not a performance, not for the press, a shield. He led her to a quiet corner and whispered, "You're safe. I won't let him near you." Her breathing was erratic. "I thought I was past this. I thought I was okay." "You are," he said softly. "You're brave. This doesn't erase that." She looked up at him, eyes glassy. "He ruined me." Ethan shook his head. "No, Olivia. He broke you, but you're the one who chose to heal." She closed her eyes, his arms still around her, and for the first time in public, she didn't feel like she was being watched. She felt held. They left the gala early. Ethan didn't wait for excuses or explanations. The moment Olivia's hand trembled in his, he turned to Margaret, offered a brief nod, and whispered something to the staff. Within minutes, they were in the back seat of his black sedan. The driver instructed not to speak. Olivia sat curled against the window, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, eyes lost in the blur of city lights. She hadn't spoken a word since she saw Nathan. Ethan didn't push, but he stayed close, not touching, just there. The silence between them was no longer unfamiliar, but this one felt heavier, like glass about to crack. When they reached the mansion, she didn't wait for him. She climbed the stairs, headed straight to her room, the hem of her gown trailing behind like a ghost. Ethan followed her at a distance. She pushed open her door, but didn't enter. Instead, she stopped in the doorway, one hand gripping the frame. Then, without turning, she whispered, "Will you come in?" He stepped forward. Of course. She walked to the edge of her bed and sat down. Slowly, with trembling fingers, she began unfastening the pearl buttons of her gown. Ethan turned away, giving her privacy, but didn't leave. "I need to tell you," she said, voice hollow, "all of it." He turned back. She was now in a loose robe, face bare, hair let down like a curtain, hiding her vulnerability. "I don't expect you to fix it," she continued, "but I don't want to keep hiding from you." Ethan sat in the armchair across from her. He didn't interrupt. His silence wasn't passive. It was permission. Olivia took a deep breath. "I was 19 when I met Nathan," she began. "He was older, confident. He made me feel like I mattered. At first, it was kind, sweet even. He encouraged me to paint, told me I had a gift." She paused, her eyes glassy, and then it shifted. Her voice tightened. "He started criticizing everything. My friends, my clothes, my paintings. He said I was too emotional, too sensitive, that my art was childish, that I should be grateful someone like him saw something in me." Ethan's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. "Then came the isolation," she continued. "Little by little, he made me depend on him. I stopped painting, stopped seeing people. I believed him when he said no one else would ever want me, that I was broken." Her hands trembled now. "He never hit me, not in the way people expect, but he tore me apart from the inside out. I lost myself completely. It took everything I had to leave, and when I did, I promised myself I'd never let anyone close again." She looked up then, directly into Ethan's eyes. "Until you..." A tear slipped down her cheek. "You didn't force your way in. You just stayed, and I didn't know how much I needed that until tonight." Ethan exhaled slowly, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "Olivia," he said gently, "you never needed fixing. What he did to you was cruelty, not truth. And the fact that you walked away from that you rebuilt any part of yourself, that's strength." She closed her eyes, a single sob escaping. He stood, approached slowly, and knelt before her. "I need you to know something," he said. "This marriage started as strategy, a way to protect the company. You were never supposed to matter." He looked up at her, vulnerable now. "But you do." She blinked. "Ethan," he reached for her hand, and this time she didn't pull away. "I'm not going to let him near you again," he said. "I promise." Olivia whispered. He was invited. Someone knew he'd be there. Ethan's expression darkened. "Then I'll find out who, and I'll make sure it doesn't happen again." She leaned into him, forehead resting against his shoulder. "I don't want to be afraid anymore." "You won't," he murmured. "Not while I'm breathing." That night, she didn't ask him to sleep on top of the covers. She pulled back the blanket. Wordlessly, Ethan lay beside her, fully clothed, careful, present, and when her fingers reached for his, he didn't just hold her hand, he held space for her grief, for her rage, for her strength, for her rebirth. The next morning, he made a call before sunrise. "Get me everything on Nathan Carver," he said into the phone. "Where he works, where he lives, who invited him to the gala. I want every detail." By the end of the day, he had names. Lucas, his cousin, always charming, always calculating, had extended the invite under the guise of networking. But the timing was too precise, too cruel. Ethan confronted him the following evening at the Sterling Holdings building. "You crossed a line," he said, standing nose to nose with Lucas in the executive lounge. Lucas raised an eyebrow. "She's your wife, Ethan. Shouldn't she be able to handle a little pressure?" Ethan didn't blink. "You invited her abuser to a public event. I invited a guest with business potential." Ethan's voice dropped to ice. "You're done." Lucas laughed. "You think you can cut me out?" "The board trusts me." Ethan smiled coldly. "Not when they hear the recordings." Lucas Paulette. Back at the mansion, Ethan didn't tell Olivia everything yet. Not because he didn't trust her, but because he wanted to protect her from more stress. Instead, he returned to her studio where she was painting again. He watched from the doorway. "What is it this time?" he asked softly. She smiled. Something new, something fierce. And it was a canvas filled with fire, not destruction, but transformation. She looked at him, color on her cheeks, eyes glowing. "Do you believe people can come back from anything?" Ethan stepped into the room without hesitation. "I believe you already have." By Monday morning, the mansion no longer felt like a retreat. It felt like a fortress. Ethan had already installed a private security firm. By the time Olivia woke, cameras were checked, staff questioned, access lists revised. Every corner of the property was mapped with silent precision. It wasn't paranoia. It was protection. When Olivia walked into the kitchen that morning, still in her robe, her hair tousled from sleep, she noticed the man in a discreet earpiece standing by the front door. She turned to Ethan with furrowed brows. "Who is that?" Ethan set down his tablet. "His name is Tom, former Navy. He's here for you." She blinked. "You hired a bodyguard." He nodded. "Two, actually. One for the house, one for anywhere you go. They're trained to be invisible, but always watching." Olivia swallowed hard. "You didn't ask me." "I didn't have to," he said gently. "After what happened at the gala, it's not just about safety, it's about peace of mind. You deserve to sleep without wondering who might walk through a crowd." She stared at him for a long moment, then nodded. "Thank you." That afternoon, Ethan received confirmation of what he already suspected. Lucas had colluded with Nathan. Phone records, emails, meeting logs, a strategy designed to destabilize Ethan by targeting Olivia's trauma, by weaponizing her past at the very moment the Sterling Holdings board was preparing for a critical vote. When he read the messages, cold, calculated, personal, something in Ethan snapped. It wasn't just business anymore. It was war. He shared everything with Olivia that night. They sat on the couch in her studio, her legs tucked beneath her, a blanket draped over her shoulders. He handed her a printed file, black and white proof that her worst fears had been engineered. She flipped through it slowly. The emails, the names, the timestamps. When she reached the end, she exhaled shakily. "They planned this," she said. "Every second of it." Ethan nodded, jaw tight. "They thought you were a weakness, that I'd be too distracted to fight back." She met his eyes. "What are you going to do?" He leaned forward. "What we are going to do," he corrected. "Because from now on, I'm not the only one in this fight." She looked at him, surprised. "I want you beside me," he said. "Not just as my wife on paper, but as my partner, my equal. I need your strength, Olivia, and your voice." Her breath caught. "You're not scared of what people will say?" she asked. "Let them talk," Ethan said. "You've survived worse than their opinions." That night, she didn't ask him to sleep in her bed. She invited him to stay the whole night without boundaries. He held her close, not possessively, not out of desire, but as someone who had chosen her fully and freely. And when he whispered against her hair, "You are not alone in this," she believed him. In the days that followed, their unity became unshakable. Ethan began preparing a case to present to the board, evidence not just of Lucas's sabotage, but of Nathan's involvement and how it all intersected with Olivia's trauma. Olivia helped organize the files. She annotated timelines. She wrote her version of the story in a clear, steady hand. At night, they would sit on the floor of his office, cross-legged like teenagers plotting a revolution. Sometimes they laughed, sometimes they cried, but always they worked together. She asked questions about the company, about his childhood, about why he'd built walls so high no one could scale them. He told her about the pressure of legacy, the loneliness of being the sterling heir, the years of pretending that control equaled strength. "You're the first person who's ever seen past the name," he confessed. She smiled. "You're the first person who's ever looked at me without trying to fix me." And so their alliance deepened, not just in strategy, but in soul. Olivia started painting again with fire, not just to heal, but to express. She created a new series, faceless figures standing in the ruins of their past, surrounded by wild, living color. One canvas showed a woman with her heart held in her own hands, bloody, bruised, but whole. Ethan saw it and stared for a long time. "That one," he said quietly. "It's everything. I think it's the first time I painted myself." She whispered. She decided to show them. Together, they organized a small private exhibit at the mansion, inviting trusted guests, board members, a few media allies, close friends of Ethan's. The space was curated carefully, candles, soft music, walls covered in Olivia's journey, and at the center, the canvas of the woman with the heart. People walked through the rooms in silence, visibly moved. It wasn't just art, it was truth. At the end of the night, one of the board directors approached Ethan. "She's stronger than all of us," the woman said, glancing back at Olivia. Ethan smiled. "I know." The next morning, as they walked through the garden, Olivia took his hand. "Do you think we'll win?" she asked. Ethan squeezed her fingers. "We already are." She turned to him. "Even if we lose the company?" He met her gaze. "Serious now. Then we'll build something else together." And in that moment, Olivia realized something deeper than safety had been born. Belonging. Not because Ethan protected her, but because he invited her to protect herself and gave her the space to rise. The first time they made love, there was no script, no grand music, no candlelit speeches, only quiet and breath, and two people who had finally stopped hiding from themselves and from each other. It began with a storm. Outside, rain drummed against the windows like a heartbeat. Inside, the mansion was cloaked in soft light, shadows dancing along the hallway walls as Olivia stepped into Ethan's bedroom. Not as a guest, not as a wife by contract, but as a woman ready to be seen. He looked up from where he sat on the edge of the bed, unbuttoning the cuffs of his shirt. His eyes met hers, and something passed between them. No permission, no pressure, only presence. She walked toward him slowly, barefoot, her robe falling slightly off one shoulder. Her hair was loose, damp from the shower. Her chest rose and fell with a quiet vulnerability. She wasn't trying to hide anymore. "Are you sure?" he asked, voice rough with emotion. Olivia nodded. "I don't want to be afraid of closeness anymore. Not with you." Ethan stood, every movement gentle. He stepped closer, his hands hovering near her face. "I won't rush you. You won't have to," she whispered. Their first kiss wasn't urgent. It was careful, reverent. Their lips met like a question long held in silence, answered not with words, but with sighs. When his hands finally touched her skin, she didn't flinch, and when she touched him back, tracing the lines of his chest with trembling fingers, he closed his eyes, not from pleasure, but from something deeper. Recognition. For hours they moved slowly, like they were learning each other, not just through bodies, but through all the places life had broken them. He kissed the scar on her shoulder. She always hid. She ran her hands along the muscles of his back, as if trying to carry what had once burdened him alone. And when they lay tangled in the aftermath, sweat cooling, heart still racing, she whispered, "You feel like home." Ethan pressed his lips to her forehead. So do you. From that night on, nothing was the same. They didn't just share a bed. They shared space. Real space. In the morning, he brought her tea before she woke. At lunch, she sent him sketches of her latest painting. At night, they lay in bed talking about everything and nothing. Memories. Regrets. Quiet dreams they never dared voice before. One evening, Olivia found him on the balcony, staring at the stars with a distant look. "You okay?" she asked, stepping beside him. He nodded slowly. "I've spent my whole life building something I thought would make me feel whole, but none of it ever touched this part of me." "What part?" He looked at her, eyes raw. "The part that just wanted to be seen, not as an heir, not as a CEO, but as me." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Then let me see you." And he let her. He told her about the pressure growing up, with a name that weighed more than a mountain, about the father who only measured worth by profit, about the moments he almost broke, but didn't, because no one ever asked how he felt. "I was trained to win, not to feel," he confessed, "until you." Olivia reached for his hand. "We both forgot how to feel, but we're remembering now." She began painting him, not his face, but his essence in swirls of burnt gold and steel blue, in lines that conveyed silence and restraint, balanced with sudden explosions of vulnerability. When he saw it, he stood still for a long time. "That's me." She nodded. "The version you didn't even know existed." He pulled her into his arms, "And you brought him out." The intimacy between them deepened with time. Not just physical, but emotional. They cooked breakfast together, bumping hips and laughing over scrambled eggs. They danced barefoot in the living room on Sunday mornings, music low, their bodies swaying as if no one had ever hurt them. And yet, not everything was perfect. There were still moments. Moments when Olivia would freeze if startled too quickly. Moments when Ethan woke from dreams of his father's voice, judging, looming. But now those moments didn't separate them. They witnessed each other through them. One afternoon, while Olivia was painting in her studio, Ethan came in with something wrapped in linen. "I want you to see this," he said. She unwrapped it carefully and gasped. It was a box of her earliest sketches, the ones she thought were lost. "I found them in a storage unit your mother had abandoned," he said. "They're yours. Always were." Tears welled in her eyes. "Why would you do this?" "Because you deserve every piece of yourself back." She threw her arms around him, emotion crashing through her like waves. And in that embrace, she whispered something that made Ethan's breath catch. "I love you." He stepped back slightly, eyes locked on hers. "Say it again." "I love you, Ethan." He exhaled. "God, I've waited my whole life to hear those words from someone who meant them." And he kissed her long, deep, as if their hearts had just been stitched together by truth. From that moment forward, love was no longer a question. It was their rhythm. He would whisper it as she drifted to sleep. She would write it in notes tucked into his briefcase. They wore it not in gold bands, but in every small act that said, "I see you. I choose you." And just when everything felt finally whole, Ethan said something one night as they lay in bed. Limbs tangled, heart slow. "I'm going to burn the contract." Olivia turned her head. "You don't have to. We've moved past it." He shook his head. "It's not enough to outgrow it. I need to destroy what we started so we can build something real." She reached for his hand. "Then let me light the match." The boardroom was colder than usual. Glass walls, a long obsidian table. 12 executives seated in stiff tailored suits. Behind them, panoramic windows revealed a gray Manhattan morning, mirroring the tension thickening in the air. Ethan stood at the head of the table, his presence sharp, calm, unreadable. Beside him, Olivia sat silently, no longer a ghost in the shadows, no longer invisible. She wore a navy blue dress, simple, elegant, grounded, her hair tied back, her gaze steady. She hadn't come as the quiet wife. She had come as a witness, as proof, as truth. Lucas leaned back in his chair across the room, casual as ever, legs crossed, fingers tapping a fountain pen against the table. "This meeting feels unnecessary," he said with a smile. "A distraction. Frankly, can we get to the vote?" Ethan's voice was clear, measured. "Before we vote on anything, we need to address the actions of one of our own." Lucas raised an eyebrow. "Is this about the gala?" "I thought your little PR stunt was—" "It wasn't a stunt," Ethan interrupted, the edge in his tone unmistakable. "It was sabotage, targeted, deliberate, and orchestrated by you." A few board members shifted in their seats. Lucas scoffed. "That's a serious accusation." Ethan pressed a button on the remote in his hand. The screen behind him lit up. Emails, text logs, Timestamps. Here's proof of you inviting Nathan Carver to the gala under false pretenses. Here's a trail of communication between you and him, spanning weeks, coordinated, manipulative, and timed just before the Sterling Holdings annual vote. Murmurs rippled around the table. Olivia didn't flinch. She had seen it all, lived it. Lucas leaned forward. You're basing all of this on assumptions. Ethan raised an eyebrow. I'm basing this on audio. He tapped again. A recording played. Lucas' voice clear, smug. She's his soft spot. You get in her head, and he'll crumble. They're fragile. She's damaged goods. The room went silent. Lucas turned pale. Olivia's hand rested calmly in her lap. Though her heart pounded, she looked around the table, her voice quiet but resolute. I was invited to that gala to be humiliated. The man you heard on that tape, he's my former abuser. I left him years ago, and still, they used my past as a weapon. She stood slowly. The room followed her with their eyes. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here for truth. You can vote today on numbers, on legacy, on performance metrics, or you can vote on integrity, on who you choose to stand beside, because this company will be shaped not just by profit, but by people. A long pause, then she added softly, I am not broken. And neither is he. Ethan looked at her, truly looked at her. And in that moment, he wasn't just proud. He was humbled. For the first time in his career, he wasn't the one who won the room. She did. The board chair cleared his throat. Mrs. Sterling, thank you. Your words were powerful. He turned to Ethan. Mr. Sterling, do you have a formal recommendation? Ethan nodded. I move to suspend Lucas Sterling indefinitely and remove him from all voting positions until further review. Effective immediately. Lucas rose, fists clenched. You can't do this. I am this company. No, Ethan said, stepping forward. You were its rot. Security entered the room before Lucas could respond. As he was escorted out, he glared at Olivia. She didn't look away. Ethan turned back to the table. Now, shall we vote? It was unanimous. After the meeting, the boardroom slowly emptied, members nodding respectfully toward Olivia as they left. Some shook her hand. Others simply held her gaze with something like admiration. When they were finally alone, Ethan approached her, eyes dark with emotion. You didn't just help me today, he said. You saved something I thought I had to carry alone. Olivia touched his chest. We're not alone anymore. That's the difference. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. The marriage contract. He held it up between them. This doesn't define us anymore. She nodded, eyes glassy. Then burn it. They walked together into his office. Ethan opened the fireplace, struck a match, and set the contract aflame. They watched as the paper curled, darkened, and turned to ash. Not with vengeance, but with peace. Olivia leaned into him, her head on his shoulder. What now? She whispered. He smiled. Now we rewrite everything. The ashes of the contract still lingered in the fireplace the next morning. Olivia walked past them barefoot, a cup of warm tea in her hands. The air in the mansion felt lighter now, like it had exhaled, like the house too had been holding its breath for far too long. In the days that followed the board meeting, something shifted between her and Ethan. They no longer tiptoed around each other's pasts. They built something in the open. No more shadows, no more pretending. Every word was sincere, every glance was soft. Even silence had become sacred between them. Not absence, but space filled with knowing. And then one rainy afternoon, Ethan disappeared. He left a note on her easel. Wear something soft. Meet me in the garden. 2. Olivia raised an eyebrow. The garden? In the rain? She pulled on a long cardigan and slipped out into the drizzle. The path was lined with soft lanterns, flickering gently beneath the overcast sky. The flowers shimmered with dew, petals blushing under the gentle touch of rain, and there, under the arbor where jasmine bloomed wild, stood Ethan. He was in a black turtleneck, sleeves rolled to his forearms, hair damp, no suit, no tie, just him. In his hand, a small velvet box. Olivia froze. He smiled, not the cool CEO smile she'd seen 1,000 times, but the soft, vulnerable one reserved only for her. I know we already did this once, he said, stepping forward. But that was paper, strategy, fear. This time it's different. She blinked back tears. What are you doing? I'm asking, he said gently, dropping to one knee, and just like that, the rain ceased to matter. Time ceased to move. Olivia Lane, he said, his voice trembling slightly. You walked into my life as a contract and ended up becoming the thing I never knew I needed. Peace, fire, truth. You didn't just survive. You taught me how to live." He opened the box, a simple gold band, delicate, engraved with a brushstroke. "Here, brushstroke. I don't want a marriage built on conditions. I want one built on choice. Will you marry me again? For real? For everything?" Tears slipped down her cheeks. "Yes," she whispered, falling to her knees with him. "Yes, Ethan, yes." He slid the ring onto her finger slowly, reverently, then kissed her, not with urgency, but with the quiet desperation of a man who knew how close he'd come to never finding what mattered. They stayed like that in the garden, rain soft on their shoulders, her head tucked into the curve of his neck, his arms around her like shelter. Exactly 1 month later, they were married again. This time there was no press, no contracts, no board members, no champagne toasts or marble staircases. Only 10 guests, a flower-lined aisle in the backyard, and a garden alive with spring. Olivia wore a soft ivory dress she had sewn herself, light, flowing, with painted details along the hem. Wildflowers, water, fire, symbols of her healing. Ethan wore no tie, just a dark linen shirt, sleeves rolled, barefoot like her. Their vows were whispered beneath the jasmine arbor. He held her hands. "I vow to never silence you, to never define you, to protect you without caging you, to love you even when the silence returns, and especially when it doesn't." She looked into his eyes. "I vow to never hide again, to show up messy, scared, whole, to see you even when the world doesn't, and to love you without needing you to fix me." As they kissed, their guests, friends, not strangers, rose in quiet applause. No cameras, no declarations, only belonging. Later that evening, Olivia wandered into her studio alone. The sunlight had turned gold. The easel was empty. She pulled out a new canvas, and for the first time in years, she didn't hesitate before touching it. She painted a home, not a structure, but a feeling. 2 figures, hands clasped, a single thread of red connecting their hearts. When Ethan walked in barefoot, holding 2 glasses of wine, he paused. "That's us." She smiled. "It always was." He placed the glasses down and walked over. Behind her, he wrapped his arms around her waist. "I want to give you a child," he whispered into her hair. She stilled. "I want a family," he said. "One where love isn't earned, one where no one has to hide. Not ever again." She turned slowly, her eyes full of stars. "Then let's build it." And as their foreheads touched, they both knew this wasn't the end of their story. It was the beginning. The house was no longer quiet. Laughter echoed down the hallways, small feet padded across the hardwood floors, the smell of oil paint mixed with cinnamon rolls and wet crayons. There were handprints on the windows, toys under the piano bench, and a faint melody always humming somewhere in the background. Either from the record player or from Olivia's voice, it had been 4 years since their second wedding, and nothing was the same except what mattered. The garden bloomed wilder now, less trimmed, more alive. Olivia refused to tame it. She said flowers were like children. They needed space to grow on their own terms. Ethan built her a new studio out back, floor-to-ceiling windows, sky-high shelves for paints, brushes, canvases, a fireplace for winter afternoons. On the walls, her latest series, Becoming, each painting a reflection of healing, motherhood, memory, and truth. The first piece in the collection, a portrait of a woman standing in sunlight, one hand holding a child, the other covered in paint. The title, Survivor. Ethan didn't just admire her art, he celebrated it. He became the kind of man who rearranged meetings to be home for dinner, the kind who knew which brand of paper she liked for sketching, the kind who danced with Emma in the kitchen while Liam painted superheroes on his father's white dress shirts. Olivia watched them sometimes from the studio window, brush in hand, tears in her eyes, not of sadness, but of disbelief. This was her life, a life she never thought she deserved. Liam was 3, already serious and curious, with his father's brow and his mother's fire. Emma had just turned 1, chaotic, joyful, unstoppable. She had Olivia's eyes and Ethan's stubbornness. One evening, while the children napped and the fireplace crackled low, Olivia rested her head on Ethan's lap. He was reading one of her old journals she had given him to understand more of who she used to be. At one point, he paused. "You used to think you were invisible," he murmured. She nodded. "You wrote, 'I could disappear tomorrow, and no one would know what was lost.'" Her throat tightened. "I remember." Ethan closed the journal and stroked her hair. "You were wrong." She looked up. "You're the reason I see the world differently now," he said. "You didn't disappear. You woke up, and you woke me up with you." That night, they didn't speak much. They just lay there, limbs entwined, wrapped in the quiet safety they had built from the ruins. At her first solo gallery opening, Olivia gave a speech. The room was filled with survivors, women who had lived through storms and were now holding brushes instead of chains. Ethan stood at the back, holding Emma on his shoulder. Liam beside him. Olivia took the mic. "There was a time," she said, "when I believed my worth was tied to silence, when I thought pain had to stay hidden to be real. But love, real love, is what broke that silence." She smiled through tears. "I didn't just fall in love with a man. I fell in love with a life I never imagined could be mine." The audience rose to their feet in applause, not because she was brilliant, though she was, but because she was true. Back at home, Ethan placed the kids to bed and found Olivia on the balcony, sipping wine under the stars. He wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, then kissed her temple. "You never stop becoming," he whispered. She looked at him, eyes shining. "Neither do you." They stood in silence, watching the moon climb slowly over the garden, and as the wind brushed against them, soft, cool, familiar, Olivia reached for his hand. "Do you think the past ever really disappears?" she asked. "No," he said, wrapping his fingers around hers. "But I think we learn how to carry it differently, like a shadow that no longer scares us." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "I used to live in survival," she whispered. He kissed the top of her head. "Now you live in color." And in that moment, with the world quiet and full around them, Olivia Lane Sterling knew her story hadn't ended. It had begun, in brushstrokes, in lullabies, in arms that held without hurting, in love that grew where silence once lived. She thought she was choosing silence to survive. But in truth, she was waiting for someone who wouldn't be afraid of her shadows, someone who wouldn't rescue her, but stand beside her while she rescued herself. Ethan didn't fix her. He simply stayed. And in that staying, love grew. Not loud, not perfect, but real. Because sometimes what heals us isn't a grand gesture, but a quiet presence that never leaves.